Why are we using it? And after reading all the studies and stuff, I came to the conclusion that really this is really nothing more than a probiotic for cows, essentially. And again, I've got some slides to share with everybody in a sec to just walk people through my thought process. Because I'm more than happy for, like, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm still waiting for somebody to point out to me, here's why you're wrong on the chemistry. Because even having posted this publicly, it's been seen by more than 50,000 people. I've personally sent it to PhDs that I actually know. Nobody's come back with like, you got it wrong because of this, you got that wrong because of that. All I'm hearing is just a lot of skepticism, really, and a lot of Bill Gates is evil type stuff, which we've talked about off air. I get it. Like, I share many of those same thoughts and sentiments and stuff. I do, however, though, think that having, again, looked into the chemistry of it, what is it doing? We'll get to that in a sec. I do definitely
Yeah,
think that this isn't a battle worth having because
no, it's the sort of thing where obviously we'll get into it all. But when I first saw Mike's post, I'd put a post out there. Probably in my post, Bill Gates was the GIF underneath, and it's the sort of thing where we all feel strongly about something, but what the aim with this sort of channel is to just find the closest thing to truth that we can. The moment we see Mike posting about it, then we instantly say, right, well, we can't just spread information if it's simply not true. But we're here to provide both sides of the story, so you, the listener, can make your own conclusion. So none of this is health advice, for the record.
and that's a good point, to be fair, I want to pick up on is because a lot of my followers seem disappointed that I said what I said. And, like I had to remind them is like, I'm here for the truth, whatever that is. You can ask my wife. I'm not normally talking in favor of the government or corporations. And that's actually not what I'm here to do today. I'm not here to defend whoever the company is that owns this drug. I'm not here to defend the government. I've got lots of issues with both. But I am here if we're going to be outraged and use our valuable time to be angry at stuff and to get the government to change what they're doing, it might as well be worth a fight. So I'll give you some examples. Up until 2021 in the UK, I'm not sure what the situation is in Scandinavia or in America, but titanium dioxide was still in the food supply.
Okay, I think we're live. So, hello everybody, welcome back to Low Carb Logic. Today we've got an interesting episode. We're going to be discussing is Bova good for us or not? Is it necessary? Do we need it, or is it just something that is out there for attention? So, I think Mike, obviously, welcome back. I think you've got a viewpoint on this that many people would, it'd be interesting to hear, so everybody can make an informed decision, basically, and find out if this is hype or not.
Yeah, cool. So, thanks for having me on. Just for everybody else's thing, if it looks like I'm just glancing off watching TV, I'm not. But my webcam's here, but my slides are over here, and James and Claus are over here, naturally looking over there. So I'm not being like daydreaming or whatever, although I do get distracted quite easily. So yeah, I think obviously you guys have invited me on just because obviously my post, I suppose, on X was polar opposite of what everybody is saying about this drug, this feed additive, if that's what we want to call it, Bovaer. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. So I got pulled into this really by accident, just because obviously all my friends know what I do for a living. This thing blew up on social media, and inevitably, my friends start pinging me like, "Oh, what's going on with this? Is this true? Is this real?" And I was like, "I have no idea, but from what I'm hearing, this is crazy. They're giving mRNA vaccines to cows, and they're poisoning the milk. Like they're trying to force us to be vegans." That's what I was thinking. I thought this is let me dive into this because this seems crazy. And
It
then
does
what I
seem crazy.
found when I dove in, yeah, but what I found, which to be fair, before I go into that, I should probably say, like, I think after what everybody experienced in 20 and after, with all the scandalous corruption by seemingly all the Western governments and, Pfizer rushing out their drug, let's say, and trying to bury the safety data for like 75 years, all of these things, I completely understand the skepticism, and because honestly, I'm that way as well. Like, 3 separate science degrees, and even for me, after 2020, I was like, can I even trust science anymore? This is This is crazy. So I understand how people can make that leap, but that seems to be what it has been, in my opinion. And I'm going to share my thought process here today, and see what people think. I posted it on X last week, just in terms of what I found about, okay, what is this drug? What is it doing? It probably still is, because they will have a grace period to get it out. For everybody listening, titanium dioxide is the same chemical that turns white paint white. It's been used, for lots of different things. So, for example, when they take all the fat out of the milk to make it skimmed, and it goes a bit grey, nobody wants to buy it. So they put this stuff in, turns it back white. It's used in lots of things. Banned in 2021 in the UK. It's probably still in the food supply to some degree. We've got microplastics in the drinking water, in bottled water. It's in the meat. It's in the fish. It's everywhere. The government, at least in the UK, they put out a letter. I can't remember how many years ago, but I read it literally last year or the year before, where they said they know that the microplastics in the water is a massive problem, but it would cost too much to fix it, so they're just going to leave it. And these are just some examples. We've also got like estrogens in the water because of birth control. There's all these other things that we have solid scientific data showing these things are problematic to human health, and these things are still happening. And nobody's outraged about it. Nobody's talking about it. We don't see viral posts about this, that, the other. Last year I was talking about microplastics in water, and it doesn't get much traction. So that's what I would encourage people to do is, if we're going to be angry, outraged, use our valuable time to fight and protect our food supply. I want all the same things. I've got kids. I want to stay healthy. I want my kids to be healthy, but it just has to be worth it. And honestly, I just don't think it is. And I'll share why in a second, if you guys are ready to go into it.
Yeah, Mike,
Yeah,
I just had just a quick comment on that. I've been talking about Bovaer for the last week and against Bovaer, just from the point of view that the whole thing is unnecessary. So it's not even about whether Bovaer does horrible things, whatever. It's not even about that. It's just about let's not put unnecessary things for fake reasons into the food supply. I totally agree with your point that there are likely hundreds, if not thousands, of other things that are in the food supply which should not be there. And my response to what you said is, yeah, no worries, I'll get to those as well. But this was just a good place for me to begin with. It's not really a beginning. We've talked about plastics and get rid of Teflon pans and whatever, but we'll take them one at a time. And if we can get it's easier to make a little bit of make focused noise if we do one thing at a time. And I think that was just my point. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, like it is a good point. So let me see if I can share my screen. Share presentation. I can't do that. So share screen. And if I go there, so if I share that. Okay, so I can't
yeah,
see you
great.
guys anymore. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks good. Just
Okay,
don't
cool.
pick your nose.
You can still see me. Fantastic. So if
Yes, we can.
I've got some animations. If I do that, you can still see it, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Perfect. So again, apologies to everybody. I just literally put this together last minute. James asked me this morning, do you have some slides? I was like, I probably should. So it's not the most professional thing, but it walks you through, like I said, when I looked into this, what is it doing? Do I need to be worried? Do I have to go vegan now? All of these things I don't want to be doing. This is what I found. So the first question I had, which is, what is this Bovaer, however you pronounce it? I don't really care. It's a brand name, as it says here, and it's a brand name for this chemical, 3-nitrooxypropanol, or 3-not for short. And basically what this is two different molecules basically put together. So this first molecule here, you can see on the diagram, is a primary alcohol, much the same as ethanol. We all know what that is. And we all know, for example, if we drink pure ethanol, bad stuff happens really, really fast. So this is just like a single molecule of alcohol. And this one over here is just a single molecule of nitrate. Now, nitrate is just an organic substance. It appears in nature. Your body makes it. It can do good things and it can do bad things as well. So it's neither, it's not black and white. So for example, your blood vessels need nitric oxide to be able to dilate, and that helps maintain cardiovascular health, blood flow, etc. Well, that starts with you need sufficient nitrate to be converted into nitric oxide. So it does some good stuff, does some bad stuff. Now, interestingly, this molecule, this drug, is technically classified as a feed additive. Some people have argued and say, well, it should be a drug. Yeah, arguably, whatever we want to call it. It's interesting to note that it was first made in 1990. And since then, we do have literally over 100, I forget how many exactly, there's over 100 studies that I found, looking into this. So, it's not as brand new as people think. We do know some stuff about it, fortunately, because if it was brand new and we knew nothing, I'd be the first one to say, we might want to back off on this until we get some data. But we do have some data. So that's what it is. So, Claus, you mentioned this just now, which is, do we even need this, etc.? And to be honest, I completely agree. But I've just added this slide in so people can see where the government are coming from, because the reality is the government aren't listening to me. They're not listening to you, Claus, or you, James. Unfortunately, they're doing what they're doing, and the government run the world, like all of the governments all over the place. So they are doing this, and their rationale is, that methane is basically 80 times more sort of harmful, they say, as CO2, just because it heats up the atmosphere, supposedly. I say supposedly, I'm not an environmental scientist. My wife is, though, which is interesting. I've not looked at all of this data myself, so that's why I say supposedly. I'm personally not convinced, but this is what they're saying, right? So methane is 80 times more harmful than CO2 because it's heating up the world. Cows produce about 40% of the world's methane emissions. So that's why they're going after the cows. Now, you've also got things like landfill. Interestingly, rice paddies create a lot of methane. So there's lots of other things they could be doing. But for the minute, they're just going after the 40% that the cows are producing. Again, do we need to do it? Is climate change real? I personally don't think so. That stresses my wife out. Like I said, she's an environmental scientist. She's completely sold on it. Interestingly, on X, there are environmental scientists that are completely against it. So it seems one of those issues that, depending maybe how you interpret the data, depends which side you sit on. To me, I'm sure it's the same with you guys and everybody listening. A lot of my skepticism about the whole climate change agenda comes from the fact that a lot of the climate stuff seems to be being used to push really sketchy policies. So I'll give you, for example, right? So in the EU, commercial flights now have to pay a carbon tax. If I fly to Norway or Spain, I have to pay slightly more to cover the carbon tax. Private jets don't have to pay a carbon tax. So it's this kind of hypocrisy for me that is like, if it's about the environment and we're literally going to die if we don't save the world, why is it one rule for me and one rule for the other people? Electric cars are another one. So electric cars are touted as, it's the greener future. But the reality is, like in the UK at the minute, I think it's something like 60% of the electricity produced by burning coal. And I've had this conversation with my wife. We started with, look, like, where does the electricity come from? Well, we burn a lot of coal. So if everybody drives an electric car, how is that more green? Well, it's not really. The hope is that one day it will become green and renewable, etc. But it's not currently. So again, like a lot of these contradictory things, hypocritical things are being pushed, and a lot of, like I said, political policies, and a lot of this is being used, I think, to kind of shrink our freedoms in many ways. And it, in some ways, seems like a massive wealth transfer, right? To force us all to buy electric cars and to force us all onto this, create this new industry that didn't exist before. If all these hypocritical things didn't exist, maybe it would be a bit easier to buy into it. So that's just my stance, though. This is not about climate change and whether it's real. This is about this Bovaer stuff and whether it's going to wipe us all out or turn us all vegan or whatever. So, but I just added that slide in so people can see, okay, this is the angle the government are coming in. We don't agree, but this is their thought process. And so what I was more interested in is, okay, so what is this stuff doing? And as we've explained, it is a alcohol molecule and nitrate molecule put together. So what is it doing to the cows? And you guys will have seen this diagram. So this obviously comes from a study. All the links are in the slides. If people want to go and read the studies, everything's linked. It looks complicated, but we're going to talk through it. So the first step here, the obvious one, we need to feed the cows some stuff. If Ed was here, I believe is a farmer. He'd be able to talk more about what the cows get fed. Lots of grains, lots of grass. I've been on a farm where the cows get fed whey protein as well, which is, I'm not sure a lot of people know that, but they get fed a bunch of stuff. And then the next step, the same as with humans, we've got bacteria in our gut microbiome that eat some of the foods that we eat, and it makes other things that keep us healthy. So one of the things our microbiome makes, as well as the cows, is short chain fatty acids called butyrate, etc. And we need that. That's positive, healthy. So the microbes are doing what they need to be doing, turning some of that food into some other stuff. The next important step here is this one, and this is where the enzymes start producing methane. The chemistry is quite complicated, but fundamentally, these enzymes start producing the methane. You can see the methane all the way on the bottom. So this is what's normally going on in the cow's digestive tract. All of this is normal. None of this is changed or edited in any way. And then over in the corner here, so I've highlighted that in blue, we can see this is where the 3-nop comes in, or the Bovaer. Again, Bovaer is just a brand name for this chemical, this drug, whatever you want to call it. And really all it's doing is, by feeding this to the cows, it stops this enzymatic reaction. Really? Well, I shouldn't say stops. Technically it's reducing it, right? So it doesn't reduce it down to zero. It reduces how much methane is produced by the cows. So all of the studies, if you look at, some find a little bit more, some find a little bit less, but on average seems to be reducing the methane production by about 30%. And to be honest, that's the part of the research that, undoubtedly probably is fudged a little bit by the company that stands to financially gain from having this drug in all of the cows. And that's why so many studies have been done. Some of them find a 40% reduction, some of them find maybe a 20% reduction. But if we take the average, and we're saying, okay, about 30% reduction in methane. So that's what it's doing. And this is why, I keep telling people, it's basically like a probiotic for the cows, because it's altering their microbiome, or altering the way their microbiome functions. And for everybody else listening, your microbiome is just the bugs in your digestive tract that eat some of the food that you eat. Same for the cows. So already at this step, and I'm going to address all the concerns next, because I had all the same concerns, which is why, I've kind of vaguely know what they are. This is no different to you or I. We take a microbiome and then we basically fart less, we burp less, right? This is, kind of fundamentally what's going on here. So obviously, by this point, we think, right, okay, we're giving them this supplement, let's call it additive drug, whatever. It's changing the microbiome. Okay, so this first concern is like, is this good for the cows? And this is the first question I had, is like, are we just going to kill all the cows off, right? Because we know all the governments all over the world want us all to be vegan at some description.
Yes. So if we put a bit of context in here, so obviously we see the first bits which come out in the public, and it says it will make your ball sack drop off, it will make you infertile, blah blah blah. And then what Mike's doing is basically going from the bottom up. Let's actually have a look at the science here. So this can't be good for the cows, surely, can it, Mike?
Is it going to drop off, Mike?
Again, this is what I thought. So the first thing that I noted was, again, this thing's been around since 1990. There's no reports of any cows getting sick, dying from being fed this stuff. Now, again, I'm happy to concede here. Maybe they're burying it. They don't want it to come out. This is probably a multi-million-dollar company. I don't know. I imagine. And where there's money to be made, there's a lot of dodgy stuff going on. We all know that. The study, and there's many studies that have looked at this, but the one that caught my eye on this particular topic was this 1-year experiment where they took, there's only 4 there, but in this experiment there was 64 cows for an entire year. And they fed them 69.8 milligrams of this 3-nop stuff, so 69, almost 70 milligrams per kilogram. Again, if Ed was here, he'd be able to tell you, I don't know, what was the cow weigh, like 700 kilos or something crazy. So you could do the math to figure out, roughly what they're being fed. And at the end of the year, what do you think happened to these cows?
Nothing.
No idea.
Literally nothing.
Wait.
I mean, if you read the study, they looked at things like methane emission, they looked at milk production, they looked at all sorts of stuff. And of course, they found it reduced the methane, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. But the thing that stuck out to me was none of the cows died, none of them got sick. There was not one single report of the cow's testicles fell off and it was because we fed them 3-knot. Like literally nothing happened. It's like a 1 year long experiment. Now, granted,
Mike,
some people might.
Yeah, did they say anything about where the, if you reduce methane by 30%, obviously the molecules that go into making methane, however many 100 tons that is, they need to go somewhere else.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of my slides. So we're getting there, Klaus.
Okay, thanks.
You jump in ahead with, because it's a very good
Yeah,
question.
don't worry.
Like it's if like we're changing the microbiome, so something changes. Is a logical question. But the first step is like, okay, it's not killing the cows, and it's not sick. It's not turning the cows sick. Now, somebody might say, look, we need a 10-year experiment. I agree, we probably do. And we can say that for lots of things. We have lots of drugs that get approved on the basis of a 6-month trial. For example, I take, I don't have it on me right now. I take Ventolin and Seretide every day, otherwise I can't breathe. These drugs have been around forever, but still to this day, I don't think there's no 40-year trial of Ventolin and Seretide to prove its safety over a 40. Like I'm 40 years old. There are no 40-year trials to say, look, this is what happens or what doesn't happen. So yeah, more long-term studies are generally better, but after feeding this stuff to the cows for a whole year, nothing crazy happened. They didn't grow 2 heads, none of that stuff. So next concern was, okay, the cows aren't dying, but it's gotta, and again, this is where my thought process went, which is why it's structured this way, but it's, so I just thought like, it's got to end up with the milk, or it's got to end up with the meat, or, and it's got to be bad for humans, because as you said, James, we've seen people quoting studies saying it's going to give you cancer, your testes are going to shrink, it's going to turn you gay, or whatever crazy things. The thing to point out about all of those claims and all of those studies that people are misquoting, in my opinion, is they're all done in rat studies. I'm jumping ahead here now, but the first thing to point out is like they're feeding the stuff to the rats orally. Like they're literally feeding it to them in really high doses, as it says here. So 300 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day of this 3-knot. Now, if we go back, so the cows are getting less than 70. So these rats are being fed 300 milligrams, so massive, massive doses. They're feeding it to them orally. But where people get, and I did the same, when I read this statement from the Food Standards Agency, which basically says, look, like we fed this stuff to the rats, they all develop these cell tumors in 4 out of 49 females, and evidence of carcinogenity, in female rats. So, like I read that and I think it causes cancer, right? Like anybody would come to that conclusion. But again,
Yes.
we're feeding it orally to the rats. Nobody's feeding the stuff to people. Like none. Nobody's putting it in your probiotics or like nothing, right? At least not that I'm aware of. So the next thing is then, right, we're not purposefully feeding it to people, but is it in the milk? Is it in the meat? Like, again, logically, it has to be. If we go back to the chemical, so I found this experiment, which is basically like 6 experiments all in one, right? And what they wanted to figure out is, does it get into the milk? Does it get into the meat? Where's this drug going? So what they did was they took this is the 3-knot chemical structure. This side of it is actually the nitrate, and they attached a radioactive molecule to all 3 of these points. And they wanted to see, okay, where does this go? Like where in the body? Does it get weed out? Do we breathe it out? Not we, but like the animals, does it end up in the feces? Does it end up in the ground? These are all things we need to know, because like if you are exposed to this stuff, if you have it on your skin, it'll dry your skin out. It might burn, exactly like you would expect ethanol to do, to be fair, which is unsurprising because if you remember, this molecule is half an alcohol. And again, if you get exposed to just pure alcohol, bad stuff happens really, really fast. So all those safety warnings from the Food Standards Agency, etc., all of that, in my opinion, is geared towards, because the farmers have to handle this stuff. So all of that is to make sure that they're not just holding it raw in their hands and all of this crazy stuff. So in my opinion, that's for their safety, really. So anyway, in this experiment, they attached a radioactive molecule, they call it a tracer, to these 3 points. And then they fed this 3-knot stuff, that's the chemical structure of Bovaer. they fed it to these animals, right? So they fed it to the rats, they fed it to the cows, and they fed it to the goats. Again, with the intention of seeing where does it end up in the body. And again, this is where a lot of the crazy claims are coming from, because in the rat studies, there's quite a few studies, and this one shows the same, that the radioactive tracer molecule was found in the stomach, in the intestines, and in the liver. And undoubtedly, if they tested other things, they'd probably find it there as well, right? But that's where most people are stopping with, look, they found it in, you know, the rat's liver, so it's going to accumulate in your body, it's going to accumulate in the cow's body, right? But what people are not telling you is the scientists have found the radioactive tracer. And then when they follow that up, which is why I've put it in green here. So in this experiment, which you can read for yourself, when they finally then, so they find the radioactive tracer in the stomach, intestines, and liver. So then basically they kill the rats and then analyze all the tissues and everything to see, you know, like, is this the 3-NOP stuff? And they just couldn't find the 3-NOP or the Bovaer. They just couldn't find it anywhere using standard drug testing methods. Now, I've had somebody say to me, well, you know, like, maybe it's such a small amount that we can't detect it using current technology. That's a fair comment, like, very fair comment. However, if we're going to nullify this research on that premise, then we have to nullify every drug trial in existence, because this is the same technology. And again, this isn't me defending these companies or whatever. This is just me trying to be logical. And again, if we're going to write this one off, then every drug, because this is the same process that drug companies use to see, when they invent a new drug, what does the body do with it? And this is the same process. They put the radioactive traces, get people to consume it, pay you a lot of money as a trial, and then track it through the body. So with the rats, when they dissect the rats, they can't find it in the 3-NOP in any of the tissues. Similar issue with the goats. So with the goats, they looked more at the meat and the milk issue. And what they found was 6% of the radioactive tracer molecule was found in the milk and 5% was found in the meat. Again, if I stop there and go, look, they fed 3-NOP to the goats and 5% of it was in the meat. Therefore, you know, you can very quickly see where you can end up with a very sensationalist claim that gets everybody's attention, gets everybody riled up, you know, and this is like, it's just very easy rage baity type stuff, right? Because, oh my God, they're poisoning the meat, and that's what it looks like. However, and again, you can read the study for yourself, when they analyzed the meat and the milk from the goats, they found, again, none of this 3-NOP stuff. And they even tested NOPA, which I'll explain what that is in a second. Basically, 3-NOP or Bovaer gets turned into NOPA, which gets turned into something else, into something else, into something else. But they found none of those things in the meat or the milk of the goats. In fact, when they analyzed the milk, the radioactive tracer had attached itself to a molecule of lactose. And that's all they found in the milk, was just a little bit of extra lactose.
And it's just
And
the
then
tracer.
and it's just the tracer that they're finding, like literally just the radioactive tracer. And again, you know, they're using standard drug testing protocols here. In 20 years, do we find out that that technology wasn't sensitive enough to pick up the minuscule amount? Perhaps, maybe. But again, I would argue that we've got much bigger problems, i.e. microbiology, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, in the cows, the testing they did with the cows was mostly about seeing how did it enter the blood, what happened in the blood, et cetera, et cetera. I suppose cows are really expensive. They weren't just going to start killing them off and analyzing a bunch of stuff. But what they found in the blood of the cows was that the 3-NOP was metabolized in something called NOPA, which is just a different chemical compound. And basically they found that the levels in the blood went up really fast and went down really, really fast. And that's what they found. And again, the link to that study is down below. There's more to it. There's way more chemical analysis, drug analysis, etc. But this is fundamentally what they found, which was like, yeah, the radioactive traces are accumulating in different parts of the body of the animals. However, when we analyze the different parts of the animals, and especially the milk, we're not finding any of the drugs. We're not even finding the things that the drug turn into. What we're finding is lactose and carbon dioxide. And this was their main conclusion. And I'll just read it for everybody. So it says, neither 3-NOP nor its oxidation product NOPA were detected, and it gives you the limits of detection there, in milk from a lactating goat treated with approximately 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which represents the highest foreseen dietary dose of 3-NOP for lactating animals. Right, so they're just basically saying, look, we analyzed it, we couldn't find this 3-NOP stuff in there. So based on that study, and it's a massive study, like I said, they basically did 6 different studies all in one. You know, they could have published 6 different separate studies, but they published all as one big paper. And they put together this diagram, which makes it nice and simple for us, explaining the metabolism of this 3-NOP stuff, or Bovaer, whatever you want to call it. And this is what they're finding. So, you know, we start with the 3-NOP, we feed it to the cows, the goats, the rats, etc. In the blood, it gets converted into this NOPA stuff, which is, again, just a different chemical. Then it gets rapidly converted into something called HPA. And from there, it gets converted into lactose mainly, and also the cows breathe it out, or the animals breathe it out as carbon dioxide. And actually, if you look at the data in there, I think it's something like 70% of this 3-NOP stuff is eventually breathed out as carbon dioxide. But the milk does have a little bit of extra lactose in there, you know, a little bit of extra lactose potentially in your steaks. Your steak's going to be a little sweeter, your milk might be a little sweeter, is ultimately what these, and this isn't the only study, by the way, this is just the best one that I found that went from the beginning all the way to the end, because some of these studies are looking at, they tracked the radioactive tracer, but they didn't test. So for example, they reported the milk had the radioactive tracer, but they didn't test the milk for the drug. Whereas
Right.
this is actually the study that did that, which is why for me, I was like, okay, like this is,
Yeah,
this is the one
that's an
to,
excellent bit of information, because I was kind of at the back of my head that, well, wasn't there some study that it's, but that's you answered the question. So.
yeah. So I mean, the one that you've seen, I did try to find it to include it here. I couldn't find it fast enough. The one that you've seen, because they just tracked the radioactive tracer, and then so for example, if they found 5% of the radioactive tracer in the milk, they used a mathematical equation to convert that into something they were calling 3-NOP equivalent.
Sure.
So they're assuming that the radioactive tracer only stuck to the 3-NOP, and that 3-NOP wasn't metabolized into anything else, which is honestly quite a massive assumption for a scientist to make.
Yeah, it's like the climate change assumption. It's based on speculation. Huh?
But it's a bit like that, yeah. Or like if I said to you, well, you drink coffee, do you think you wee out coffee? I mean, we all know, like, you don't wee out pure coffee, right? It gets changed into lots of different things. Your body can do a bunch of stuff with that, and you wee out something a bit different. So for
Sure.
those
Yeah.
scientists to go, well, we assume this, that's a little bit fishy. But again, that's why I like this one, because they tracked it from beginning to end. They tested everything. So there's no questions, really, in my mind.
But don't you think I think the assumption is fair enough if they find the tracer, that they assume that the tracer might still be sticking to what they stuck it to. I mean, I have no idea about how these things work, but I think I'm just saying that maybe the assumption isn't completely outrageous. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you guys can speak to some of the scientists that do these kinds of experiments, they might be able to say, well, it's actually not crazy to assume that based on this, and this. Or just on my limited education of metabolism and stuff, I just think, it's most likely going to get changed into other things. That's why we do the tests.
I'm not disagreeing with your point. I'm just I'm just putting.
So
you
two need to fight. You need to pretend that you really hate each other for this next little bit. So my perspective on the tracer is, it makes sense that you would find the tracer and not the 3-NOP, because, like we're saying, everything is starting to be metabolized throughout the system. So if that tracer is not going to be metabolized, its point is to trace where ends up. So where they then find it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, look, there are drugs that I forget the name of one. There was a drug that was used in pork farming and banned, because that one, like, it was basically some kind of steroid that made the pigs grow really fast, and I think they were adding like 10 kilos of meat onto these pigs, and that drug literally was accumulating in muscles, which is why it eventually got banned. And so there are situations where you put one thing in and you get one thing out, just accumulated in the meat and etc. So, like Claus is saying, it's not a crazy assumption, because I suppose in certain cases it does happen, but in this case, it doesn't seem to happen. look, what I've just presented might be the argument against this being classified as a drug. I don't know, because maybe I don't know enough about the toxicology stuff to know, like, do drugs just persist and not get metabolized into different things? Whereas here we've got, an organic nitrate, we've got a molecule of alcohol, and your body can do stuff with those, like produce lactose, and carbon dioxide. Not us, the cows, the animals, etc. So anyway, after all of that, when I read that tracer study, I was like, okay, it's not in the milk, it's not in the meat. Next logical thing is like, okay, but as we mentioned a few minutes ago, Klaus, we are changing stuff. We're changing the cow's microbiome, so that's got to be doing something, and it is, which is why it's a good question. So this separate study, and this one was literally published this year in August 2024, looked at exactly this. So they fed these cows this 3-NOP stuff. They analyzed the milk, as it says there, for the protein content, minerals, B vitamins, all sorts of stuff. And keep in mind, this is a separate study, completely separate. Because the first thing they found was they found no 3-NOP in the milk. None at all. No 3-NOP, none of that NOPA stuff. And so they didn't find, so these first two steps, these two, they didn't find any of this stuff in the milk, which is important. So it's not in the milk. And they analyzed the milk for all the other stuff. The only difference they found was that the milk, after feeding the cows the 3-NOP, had more vitamin B2 and more vitamin B12. That's all they found. So it had the same fat content, the same protein content, same water content, but it had more B12 and more B2. That's all they found, which kind of, I suppose, makes some sort of sense. So they were theorizing in the paper that, the cows, I think a separate study again had shown that you give the cows the 3-NOP and they produce more butyrate, which again generally has positive impacts. But then, so it kind of makes sense that, like, we're changing the cow's microbiome, and then that kind of changes a little bit what the cow is able to produce in terms of vitamins, etc. And it would be the same for us, for humans, right? If you take high strength probiotics, you change the composition of your microbiome, and then, digestive tract is either producing more gas, more butyrate, less butyrate, etc., like lots of things. But that's all they found, like literally all they found. And that is the last slide, to be honest, gentlemen. Is there anything that wasn't covered or I've not thought of?
Well, I think it's a good time for Ed to pop in. So it looks like we've got Ed here.
Fantastic.
You've covered some great topics and you've provided evidence from this study, and you've sort of collated it in a way for many people to understand. So
Hopefully.
Well done, Mike. Yeah. So if anyone has any
good
questions, then just drop it in the comments. And we've got Ed here. Ed, I think you're unmuted now. So, Klaus, did you have any questions for Mike at this point, or did we want to hear from Ed's sort of perspective?
I don't have any questions. I have a number of comments, but I think we should let's hear from Ed first.
Mike and Egg.
When we wrap up, I can say my comments.
Yeah, let's let Mike and Ed go back and forth for a little while just to relay a few points for everybody as well. So, Ed, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I just came on a few minutes ago because there was a confusion of the timing. I thought it was going to be later in the day, in the early evening, your time. So,
no worries, Ed. Yeah. Your timing is actually perfect.
It is the perfect time. Ed, just wondering if you can turn your phone landscape at all.
I do have it landscape.
Then maybe you have to turn it the other way. Turn it non-landscape. Yeah, that's better. Now we can. You're right side up.
So I didn't actually wasn't even told the topic, but I guess we're talking about the milk additive, Bovaer.
Yeah, we're talking about Bovaer and just a very, very, very quick summary.
And Mike, could you stop sharing the screen as well, Mike, just so people can have a look at our faces? Nice one, thank you. That's amazing.
Anyway, Ed, very, very quick summary on the point here. James and I have been agitating against Bovaer and boycott everything Bovaer for the whole week. And Mike posted something that, but maybe it's not as bad as you think. And then we thought, let's have a talk about it. Let's hear the arguments. And Mike presented presented the case of what Bovaer does and doesn't do. That's pretty much where we are. So there's a case. I wouldn't say he made a case for feeding Bovaer. A lot of disclaimers in there, but I think the gist of it is that maybe the shall we say the hysterical feelings that some have had around it, maybe they don't need to be completely hysterical about it, even if they don't want to consume products from cows that have ingested this.
Yeah, like it's not what you can take from the data. Like it's not doing what people are saying it's doing. So people are sharing half truths. In many cases, I'm sure just to get clicks and shares. In many cases, I'm sure they're just not understanding, which is fine. It's a complex topic. Chemistry is not straightforward, but as I've shown there, like there's over 100 studies. And I've just presented 3 or 4 different ones showing like it's not in the milk, it's not in the meat. The cows aren't dying. Your testicles are not going to shrink. You're not going to grow 2 heads. So all of this craziness that people are doing and boycotting, I suppose people think they're boycotting the corporations, but ultimately, Arla in the UK is owned by farmers. So if nobody buys Arla anymore, those farmers now have to go and find something else. So we all want to support the farmers. And I understand, we don't want the corporations doing crazy stuff to our food supply. And like we've already spoken about, Ed, I've given lots of examples of things we should be outraged about. In my opinion, this Bovaer stuff is not really one of them. It's just a waste of everybody's time. But I'd love to hear your opinion, Ed, because apparently you're a farmer.
Yeah. From what I kind of know about it, I'm not a dairy farmer. I actually used to raise purebred registered sheep. But, some of the points that I've been hearing about in general is one is it doesn't really benefit the farmer. He's got to pay the cost. He's got to do the work. He doesn't get any more milk. And he's got to somehow mix it into feed. And I've heard that the amount is between a quarter and a teaspoon. So that how accurate that's going to be able to be mixed in the cow's intake seems quite questionable. We have a lot of people, and of course this is really only going to focus on either feedlot cattle or in dairies that are feeding. Any of the people that are grazing and around the world, most dairy and beef is grazed. So how much benefit are we really going to get out of it? And why would the farmer want to have to go through all this? And when it comes to risk assessment, I know Jonathan Lundgren, he was a entomologist at USDA until he left frustrated and started working with regenerative farmers. And he did a lot of work on risk assessment of pesticides and things over the years. It's just, his thing has always been that it's almost impossible to really do all the impacts that something might have. And especially for consumers, his thing has always been, if you don't really need it, don't use it, because why would you take a risk? That's why the regenerative agriculture movement started in the late 60s and early 70s, because we started to change the way, we weren't producing food sort of in line with nature anymore. We were starting to add synthetic fertilizers as far as nitrogen in ways that plants had never really dealt with. We were using wormers and other antibiotics and stuff and all these things that were never natural in the system. And when you had somebody come to your farm or you sold your stuff out, and we kind of say, you have a family with a couple of kids that are young, come to the farm, and it's like, what do you put into this and how safe is it? We just couldn't answer that question with a good conscience, and especially long term. In regenerative agriculture, we look a lot at epigenetics right now. What happens, in multi-generations from what we eat and what we ingest. And we know by doing tests in agriculture that you can take something that's incredibly healthy, feed it differently over several generations, and totally change the offsprings. And then we also found that if we reverse that process, we can really benefit back to health over several generations, just 2 or 3 generations. So there's just so many concerns. And when you put it compared to the benefits, especially in climate, I think there's just so many other ways of looking at it. And especially when you consider it always seems to come down to the farmer. He's the one that's got to do it. He's the one that's got to pay for it. He's the one that's got to go to sleep at night and say, is what I'm doing good for my cow? Good for the environment? Good for the manure that it puts out to the microbiome in the soil? I mean, it's very complex. And as I say, from what I see initially, I don't see the benefits of climate. If we could use regenerative agriculture like we've done, using cattle to change desertification, be massive. We have a farmer, rancher, Alejandro Carrello in the Chihuahuan Desert of Mexico, 25,000 acres, totally diversified land that at one time was green. In 5 years, with just cows, he didn't do any seeding. He didn't do any fertilizing. All he did was manage properly his cows. In 5 years, he went from scrub and low succession plants to waist high deep growth. And in 10 years, he's brought up medium and higher succession plants. Naturally came in. He now gets incredible growth. He's increased his rain cycle. People joke with him, where is your ranch in the Chihuahuan Desert? And he says, put on a radar map at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and you'll probably see a little green area over my ranch. Those are
Ed,
the
so just a
impacts.
question, Ed, just a question. So from the Bovaer side of things, just to recap, because we went on to obviously the regen stuff, which is fantastic. He's managed to generate a little microclimate in a sense, or quite a big microclimate. So your perspective on Bova was, just to summarize for most people, is why are we doing it? Is that correct, or am I misspeaking?
Why we are doing it, because of how much benefit compared to certainly other approaches. How many cattle are actually going to be able to use this? Because if it's got to be in the feed, or if I don't know if it can be dosed, but how are you going to bring in cattle that are grazing and dose them? And could you actually gain at that point when you start adding all of those other externalities into it? Where are we
Yes.
gaining?
Yeah, so I
Let
suppose
alone
the
the risk
question,
that
I suppose the question is basically, if this is unnecessary, it's just another cost to farmers? Seems like Mike was saying at the beginning, is it just another transfer of wealth? So can a company create a feed additive, claim it's going to be great for everybody in the environment, when in reality it's just another monthly subscription for farmers to pay out?
along with the long-term risk assessment to the epigenetics of the cow and the epigenetics of the people that are consuming it, and the concerns that people have. It's stressful. When people digest something and then all of a sudden hear something that wasn't a good idea. Look at the COVID shot. It's like, well, I didn't know this risk, and that's a lot of stress.
Yeah, exactly. This is what Mike's point was at the start, is obviously Mike's a free thinker. So we went from the ground up of what we know now at this current time. And the study we had was about a year's worth of evidence on 68-ish cows, I think, Mike. And what we're saying is 1 year's worth of information enough? We probably don't know yet. So
I would say you're more talking probably, you got to have certainly multi-generations of cows, let alone time. And then with the people too. I mean, plus all the other externalities that we never even think about measuring. What happens to the gut biota? What happens to their manure? I mean, I remember when ivermectin came out, wormer. It was very effective wormer for people that really need to use it because they weren't grazing properly. What we noticed, though, was the manure didn't break down. Dung beetles didn't go for it. It just sat there in the field. And because obviously it was breaking up the microorganisms.
That makes sense.
All of a sudden then, if that manure is sitting in the field and it's not breaking down, then you've got more of a methane problem again.
Yeah, more toxic as well, maybe.
Think about these because science is in silos now, and risk assessment really gets harmed when science is siloed, and especially when it's delivered by the industry that's trying to promote the product.
Which is making profits of it, yeah.
Right. When the farmer isn't, he's losing money. I mean, you want to give the farmer a decent offset? And I said, that's only going to be the guys that can mix it in their feed. And that's limited. And I don't know how accurate. I don't know how they done tests on how accurate that dosage ends up being in the cow and after they put it in some kind of a trough along the way dairy cattle are fed often in the barn or in the milking parlor.
Yeah. So I think so. If we're trying to draw a middle ground here, I think we've got some potentially a good start with the science so far. But from what you've said, Ed, is we need to be looking at everything and not just what happens to the molecules within the cow. We need to be doing like environmental studies, human health studies over a prolonged period of time. And I think we can all agree on the fact that this is not very likely to happen. Are we in agreement with that?
I am.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's I can't disagree with anything Ed said, to be fair. It's just always fascinating to get different perspectives. Like, he's the farmer on the ground level. I'm just a science nerd, so I can show you all the data. Like, it's not in the milk, it's not in the meat, all this kind of stuff. But
guys,
like he's right though, on the sort of like genetic, like multi-generational risk assessment. Like, I think that's obviously a fantastic idea, but really that should be across the board as a species. And this is where I get into the realm of maybe humans aren't that smart, because we've introduced tens of millions of products, chemicals, all sorts of stuff into not only the food supply, but like we make everything out of plastic. We've got drugs based on 1 year trials and all sorts of stuff. And as Ed has rightly pointed out, if I take a new drug today to help me with my asthma, does that change my genetic expression that my kids maybe end up with X, Y? Nobody really knows that because science is never looking at that. So it's a fantastic point. I'm not sure how
realistic. We're very happy you're not a dairy cow, Mike.
I did as a
guys. I just have a quick point. In Denmark, they all herds over 50 head will be forced to feed Bovaer to dairy cows, to the dairy cows from the 1st of January 25. If they don't, they'll be fined a certain number.
Yeah,
my question is just if it's necessary for the government to force farmers to use a product, just begs questions. Even that kind of measure begs some questions for me. So massive. Definitely doesn't seem to be anything that the farmer wants to do. So it can't be good for his yields, and therefore it's probably not good for the cow anyway.
I think the other point which makes me put my tinfoil or colander hat on is when Arla then actually broke their silence and said, there's nothing to worry about. Rather than saying, like, it's the customer's always right, okay, we're going to stop this for the time being. They sort of doubled down on it and said, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. And this is where we're coming in, is like, is it something to worry about right now? So we're just sort of discussing what we know at this current point in time, really.
Yeah, I think my point, I'm just going to remake my point here, which is based on the fact that I don't believe the methane issue is a real issue. I think it's a fake problem, and therefore doing anything in relation to that and changing the metabolism of the cow, it seems to me just to be both superfluous and a bad idea. Even if it isn't, even if there are no harmful effect on humans or were anything on humans or cows, even if that were to be the case. Now, another thing is, I don't know, with the climate studies, how did they measure how much? Can they really prove that this is an issue? Because livestock, methane, climate change problems can they really prove that? What about all the cattle that was there for the last 10,000 years? Is the world still, how can we even exist with all the methane that they've excreted? Probably because there's a cycle. And then again, I'm back with Ed. I think my point is, let's go completely regen as fast as possible, as fast as realistically possible. Regenerative agriculture, it seems to me to be the answer to these things, and not all kinds of chemistry and nonsense.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, it's like live in accordance with nature. That's what the regen farming stuff seems to be to me.
And the
Makes perfect
science is
sense.
just that we're getting in regen, the potential of nature to grow. I mean, in the plant world, we're actually, by focusing on biome and nutrition of our soil and our plant and accurate nutrition, we now have a meter coming out in the US for in the field, so we can actually measure the mineral contents of our plants and growth.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
And it's a new breakthrough technology that a farmer in the research group developed. And what we've been able to do is we're able to produce plants that are probably healthier than any plant has ever been on earth. And when we do that, those plants are completely resistant to every crop pest and disease that's out there.
Interesting.
We have one of our farmers, regen farmers, who he has a company, and he works on several million acres of farms with over, I think he said, 60 or 70 crops. There isn't one pathogen or one insect or pest problem that he hasn't been able to solve with just focusing on nutrition and biome. And then that's transferring to our animals that are eating those plants. And now we're doing the metabolomics research of metabolites and realizing how that benefits us. And they're starting to do feeding studies where you feed people the exact same basic whole food, whole plant diet, meat, everything. And we measure the metabolomics of it, regen, and then we feed them out of what is in a lower percentile in the variation. And then we start doing all the how did you feel, the pee, the poop, the blood, and understanding this. And that's why we feel like we're really starting to think that this is going to be the greatest breakthrough of the 21st century.
Yeah,
Something as simple as regenerative farming. And
I
it's
think
not
that's
only
the
going to
perfect
be to
place.
our health, but the health of the planet.
Exactly. I think to me this whole Bovaer thing is, let's say for argument's sake, the whole Bovaer itself turns out to be benign and doesn't mean anything, but I think it's a reflection of the kind of the structures and the way of thinking which is prevalent, which is let's throw chemistry, let's throw a technical solution, let's throw a man-made solution at everything. And giving cows Bovaer, it's just like giving, if you're sick, you need a pharmacological solution. And as many of us know in this health space we're in, we have cured incurable chronic diseases like diabetes by behaving in a let's say,
by
in a
fixing
way
the body.
which is according to our nature, which is not to ingest things which are bad for us. And maybe it's the same for other animals too. So rather than just force chemical solutions, pharmacological solutions, factory processed whatever, I think the for the cows, the regen, for humans, the same thing. I think there's a general theme there that we need to get out of the paradigm of everything is better if it has a pharmacological, chemical, manufactured, science lab, patentable, profitable for whoever solution.
We could only measure chemistry in agriculture and in a lot of science for, modern agriculture. And that's why the focus was on chemistry. We couldn't measure microbiology.
Yeah.
It's only until recent times that, in Regen Ag now, we're on third generation metagenomics. I mean, that's
very good
we're
point.
under.
Yep.
We didn't even know how a plant actually ate
Guys, I've
until
just
about
got to
10
dip out,
years
so I'll
ago.
catch you soon.
All
What was
right,
that?
James. No, James is he's gonna pop out. He has child-minding duties.
Yeah, we didn't even know how a plant ate. And, through the rhizophage cycling, it's really kind of a rancher carnivore of bacteria. And
Yes.
that's the primary way it wants to eat, along with the fungi endophytes. So, and we didn't know that stuff because we couldn't see it. I started out with a microscope, on my farm, trying to learn what all these little critters were. And there's fungi. Now, how do I know if it's a good fungi? By the color and the shape compared to a pathogenic fungi? And what do I have for populations? Do I have enough? Do I have any fungi? And if I do this, all of a sudden I got more fungi. That's natural succession of plants and environment. So, but now we can, and they kept saying, it's chemistry, biology nature ain't going to do much. We're better than that. We can just slam it with nitrogen fertilizer. But when we did that, and we made it's like going to the hospital when you're sick and they put an IV in your arm and keep you alive. Well,
Yes.
and we realized that what that did was it shut off all the microbiology that gives you the real nutrition you need for health. And then that's why all of our food tastes like cardboard now.
Yes.
And it has no nutrients in it. And that was the greatest. Our metabolomics work over the last few years has been really, first of all, it sucked to realize how bad most of what we grow is. Even humbling to go to get produce at a farmer's market with a farmer that cares, measure their carrot, and realize it's in the 15th percentile compared to all the carrots we measured. And we thought that was good.
Exactly.
Going to a supermarket once in a while and grabbing a carrot and measuring and finding it, wow, it's at the 70th percentile. But we realized that over 90% of what we have access to is in the 10 to 25th percentile.
Yeah, depleted.
What the good news is, we could improve that massively. And what was the number one factor? It wasn't the variety of the seed. It wasn't, what you called your farm, or really even, what your soil minerals were, your sand, silt, and clay ratios were. Number one thing was soil biome. And we've been killing the soil biome. We've been destroying that symbiotic relationship. So if we improve that, we have massive gains. There's incredible hope for our health.
It seems a little bit like the feeling I get is that whether it's with agriculture or with the humans, the treatment of humans, it seems like some of the extremely useful pharmacological and chemical advances that have been made, which are very potentially life-saving and appropriate in emergency situations, they've kind of then taken over and they're just being applied to all situations rather than just very, very select few situations where there's a case for it. And anyway, I'm totally with you, Ed, on that. I think
it's
that's
just
the way.
using both. Antibiotics saved incredible amounts of lives. Use it getting, nitrogen fertilizer, even since we had degraded and tilled so much, boosted yields. A lot of people didn't starve. But all of a sudden we realized just a few years ago, even for people, probiotics, and the whole magic is it's not just switching totally to microbiology. It's incorporating microbiology and chemistry and really deeply understanding that relationship. That's where the magic is. But the chem industry wants to say anything with microbiology or organic, which is sort of meaning you're putting in that factor of that magic of microbiology, which is no longer magic. It's incredible science that's just, and it makes farming exciting now, because instead of waking up in the morning and what am I going to kill today? You wake up in the morning and how can I add more diversity to my farm?
Yeah,
and you can put your kid in the tractor or out in the field with you and not have to wonder, is that glyphosate or including with the adjuvants of Roundup or the dicambas or any of that stuff, do I have to worry? And not only about my kid's health this year, but his kids.
I think the challenge is as long as the large industries who have the big lobbying power and the big political influence, as long as they can't directly make a profit off of something, they're going to drive the solutions they have available very, very hard. And I think Bovaer is likely to be a good example of this, made by one of the world's large chemical producers, and who do lots of good products, by the way. I'm not criticizing
Right.
them and their profit motive. I'm not criticizing that either. But we need to we need to take some charge and say no to some things. And I think for me, Bovaer is a good place to start. Although, like I said, it's not where I started. I did get rid of all kinds of other things, but I'm guessing there's probably lots of other stuff in the food supply chain which shouldn't be there and which isn't healthy, and without which all of us would be healthier, the animals, the plants, and the humans
I mean,
as
Ed
well.
mentioned glyphosate. That one is in the food. It's in the food
Yeah.
that you get from the supermarket. We have the
Yes.
studies that prove it. Nobody's talking about it. And this was right at the beginning of the call. That's what the point I was trying to make is, like, there are many things to be angry about and go after the corporations and the government
Yes.
for. Bova is not one of them. It's not doing what people are saying it's doing. And again, that's not me sticking up for that company. It's just having looked into it. Like, it's not in the milk, it's not in the meat, etc. But there are many things that are. Like, glyphosate is one of them, and the fact that it's just ignored is it's crazy to me. Like, crazy.
And
I think
that's a tough one because that does benefit farmers. I mean, we know that tillage, that used to be the number one practice, is the most destructive thing we can do on our farm because it kills all the soil carbon goes up in the atmosphere. We lose our soil structure, destroys the microbial community, and causes erosion. In the United States, we have a massive amount of erosion. And so not tilling and being able to deal with weeds without having to cultivate and disturb the soil was a huge benefit. Except what's the other side of the problems? And that's where regenerative is saying, okay, how else can we solve that problem with cover crops, with using roller crimpers, with different rotations, to make it and make healthier plants? How can we eliminate and maybe feed those weeds, to our livestock? Oh, and
yes.
grazing, mix that in. I mean, and that's the exciting thing, is to be able to figure out approaches around. And in the United States, I mean, the big talk now is because we realize that we're so damn unhealthy. We got kids with, I mean, that's what Robert Kennedy brought to light, is we got kids with all these autoimmune diseases, and everybody, says, oh, it's not our product, and it's not our product. And and it's like, but why is it happening? Why is the life expectancy going down in the United States? Why is everybody
Yes.
so obese?
Yeah.
What can we do about it?
It's no different in many European countries, Ed. It's
Right.
the same situation. But I think going back to Bovaer and I think, Mike, my point with this is that fine, it happens to be the topic of the day. It has traction. And in my opinion, it is not needed for anything. But that's my opinion, obviously. And other people have opinions about methane and whatever. My opinion is we don't need it, which is why it's a perfect subject to both to talk about and to get some attention, not just on Bovaer, but, as you say, Mike, on what else is in the food supply, what else is in our environment, which is, and this is something that I'm going to pursue, and we'll be talking about, and that we can talk about also with both of you in future podcasts when we get to it. But anyway, we're gonna beat the hell out of the Bovaer stuff here as far
Can I
as it
just add
goes.
on to what you've just said
Yeah,
there?
go ahead.
Because I completely agree with everything you've just said. Completely. My concern is that if, for people like Ed, everything he's spoke about today, regenerative, I'm going to go away and nerd out on this because he's mentioned a lot of things. I'm like, this sounds amazing. So can't disagree with any of that. But my concern is if we're running around and knowingly and happily spreading what is actually misinformation, then it's easy for governments, corporations, and all the people that make the rules. It's easy to go, those lot are just crazy. Don't listen to them. And then people like Ed get labeled, oh, he's just the crazy guy on the farm. Don't listen to him because he said X and that wasn't true. And then they write you off. And we saw it in COVID with the lockdowns, you know, and it's like, you're a conspiracy. Like my wife called me a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And it turns out 2 years later, I was right. But it's all too easy for people to label you as that. And I think we damage ourselves by allowing it to happen. And that's all why I was coming out was like,
I agree. I agree with that. We should not be saying things which we cannot back up, and which is why I'm very careful to say that my argument very, very clearly is not about whether it does bad things or doesn't do bad things. My argument is I have not seen any evidence or any data that suggests that we need to feed cows this thing. So even if it is healthy for the cow or benign or whatever, don't do it. Keep it simple. Keep everything out of the food supply that doesn't that we cannot prove has a beneficial effect and is not dangerous to the animal, to the environment, to the humans, and or to anyone. That's my argument. And Bovaer fails the test, and therefore it needs to be stopped. That's my position, and I do not have to say I don't have to spread any misinformation. I don't have to lie, manipulate, or anything. I just make my case, and I think there are a lot of people who think and feel the same way, and will freely admit that of course they don't know the chemistry of whether does the Bovaer end up in my gonads or whatever. But even at the remote chance, that's enough to get attention. And then the argument is easy to make that, okay, just stop the nonsense. And then we're into a bigger political discussion, I guess, which is the discussion about climate change and greenhouse gases and all the other stuff. And that's a discussion for another day.
I think Ed needs to join Trump's new government.
One thing we realized in regenerative agriculture a while ago was, we started seeing really positive effects in our fields from, thinking about what's the microbiology and how does nature work, and developing the 5 principles of soil health that we see in nature. And we saw all this, gain and benefits. And of course, where's the peer-to-peer review? Where's the science? Where's the data? And of course, our data was, gee, our plants are healthier, our yields are better, our soil isn't whatever. And we realized we were onto something. But what we also realized was that we will never make the change that we see that this has potential for unless we do the science. And unless we do the science right, not the way science has been done with saying that, oh, it does work and we're going to prove it works. No, we're going to try as hard as hell to prove it doesn't work in every way, shape, and form, thinking everything, epigenetics, everything, holistic. What does it affect of this, that? How does it affect the butterfly? How does it affect the honeybee? All that stuff.
Yes.
Because that's what you need. And that's why Bayer is doing regenerative agriculture. Syngenta's doing regenerative agriculture. But if we look at how they're doing it, they're like 25 years behind and they're doing crappy science, the same as we've been complaining about them before. We're the ones doing the science, the breakthrough science, the metabolomics, the metagenetics, developing a sensor a multi-sensor thing that can actually measure our minerals in our plant and the seed in the field. We're doing that work. They've got billions of dollars and they're not doing it. We got pennies and we're actually doing the science. And they're going to call us, anti-science and stuff. You're just a bunch of organic tree huggers.
Yeah, that's just that's marketing and that's just trying to get the competition
we
out
live
of the
in
way.
reality. Farmers live in reality.
I'm just going to wrap up now, and I think it's interesting. All of Ed's comments, but especially the last ones. I think we are wholeheartedly in agreement about the science, the actual science, and about using actual correct data and using it in the correct way, and being very, very careful not to spread make claims which cannot be backed up is the way I would say it. I dislike the other word used because it's a word which was generated to suppress the truth. So I prefer not to use the M word on this. Although I do agree we should not be spreading misinformation. Obviously, I'd like to thank you very much, Mike, for the very clear and good presentation you made, and thank you, Ed, for making your compelling case for regen agriculture in a very good way. And I think we're probably going to very likely to come back to you because I think there is so much to discuss and debate still. So we're going to see where we can take it, not just Bovaer, but the whole healthy everything that we're working on. So we'll definitely come back to you and hope you will join us again. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's been looking at the live stream. We will post a recording of this later today on the different media platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, and X at least. So thank you very much, guys, and
Thank
hope
you.
to see you soon.
Cheers, Ed.